Para los que no lo conozcáis, el Design Wednesday es un evento promocionado por el equipo de diseño de BBVA para generar comunidad y profundizar en conocimientos relacionados con el diseño. Hoy es una ocasión muy especial, ya que tenemos a Aleksandra, que es parte de nuestro equipo, haciendo la presentación. O sea que es bastante especial, al menos para nosotros. Yo llevo ya 3 años trabajando en BBVA, en el equipo de diseño, y una de las cosas que más me sorprendió de empezar a trabajar aquí es la calidad del equipo humano. No solo porque sean buenos diseñadores, que la verdad que es una maravilla, sino que prácticamente nadie es solo diseñador. En el sentido de que dentro del equipo de diseño hay actores, actrices, hay directores de cortos, de documentales, hay doctorandos, hay profesores de universidad, hay ilustradores. Hay muchísima gente que el diseño, aparte de ser su trabajo, tiene otras pasiones. Y Aleksandra es un gran ejemplo de esto. Aleksandra consiguió desde que era pequeña, ella iba a campamentos de pequeña del espacio. Y ha sido capaz de unir sus dos pasiones, del diseño y del espacio, en cursos y a nivel también laboral. Entonces, es un gran ejemplo de cómo es la importancia de unir tus dos pasiones. Tonight we have the opportunity to listen to Aleksandra, so I'm a big fan of Aleksandra. Honestly, yeah, just a fan. Not only I've worked with her, but I consider her a close friend, and it's such an honor to listen to her and to this amazing topic. So please welcome Aleksandra Kozawska.
Hello everyone, welcome, thank you for coming. It's a really pleasure for me to be with you here today, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk about design and space, which are the both topics that are really close to my heart. But before we dive deep into this conversation about design and space, I would like you to sit back, relax, and I'll take you for a little journey. So I would like you to close your eyes for a moment, for a couple of minutes. Please close your eyes. Por favor, que cierren los ojos. Finally. That's the moment you were waiting for so long. You are sitting in a passenger seat in a rocket that is going to bring you into outer space. There are still a couple of minutes to go, but you already start to feel the vibrations of the engine going through your body. You are calm. You know you are ready. You have been preparing for this for so long. You breathe deeply and feel the time passing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You feel the sudden power of the engine that pushes you into your seat. You stay still. You can't really move because the force of the engine is so strong that it is difficult for you to even move your arms. You wait. Now, you feel a little shock. You know it's the first stage separation of the rocket, so things must be going well. As you keep rising towards the orbit, you feel like gravity is desperately trying to pull you back to the Mother Earth. But you continue to rise. Another shock. That's the second stage separation of the rocket, and you see that part of the rocket that is not needed anymore is falling behind you into the atmosphere. You continue to rise very steadily. It's so peaceful. Then, another shock. It's the engine shutdown. You look around and see that the end of the belt that was attaching you to your seat starts to float like if it was in water. Finally, you are in outer space. There's no more gravity acting on your body. You manage to rise a little bit from your chair. You look through the window. And there it is. Beautiful, huge, blue planet Earth. Here, just below you. That's the view you are waiting for. It seems so peaceful, so fragile, and yet so powerful. With the clouds covering large part of the horizon. There are no borders, just this planet that contains everything and everyone that you have ever known and loved, separated from the dark space with a thin layer of atmosphere. Take a moment and look at it. and joy. It's your home. Isn't it beautiful? Now, slowly open your eyes. Welcome to the outer space. How was it? Did you feel relaxed? Did you manage to see the planet? Yes? This is something that astronauts call overview effect. And it is actually a psychologically proved cognitive shift in perception experienced by the astronaut during the space flight, especially at the moments when they are looking at the Earth. Astronauts actually are spending quite a lot of time, it's called Earth gazing, when they have the space with a cupola looking at the Earth. This phenomenon is already known from the Apollo era, when the astronauts, the first human beings, landed on the moon. And there is a famous quote, one of my favorites, by Edgar Mitchell, who is Apollo 14 astronaut. And he said about the overview effect, "You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so trivial." Another quote, which I like a lot, and by another Apollo astronaut, tells us a little bit story about the aims that they had at that time. When we originally went to the moon, our total focus was on the moon. We weren't thinking about looking back at the Earth. But now that we have done it, that might well have been the most important reasons we went. So this is illustrating a little bit the shift in the consciousness and the focus that this overview effect is provoking. And why am I talking about this? Because the first time that I heard about overview effect, I couldn't stop thinking about how does it connect to design. As a service designer, we work a lot with the holistic design, looking at processes from end to end, trying to understand the systems in their totality. And I thought there is a big connection between this overview effect that helped me understand what it is from my design point of view. My name is Aleksandra Kozawska, and I'm a service and strategic designer here at BBVA, and this is my daytime job. My part-time job and my hobby is space. So then I convert into designer in space. But how did that happen that I ended up being fascinated by space? Well, as Sonia mentioned a little bit before, since I was a child, I was probably watching a bit too much of National Geographic and Discovery channels. And then I went to a couple of astronomical camps when I was a teenager. But then I was not really into maths, but I was quite creative and I liked to make things with my hands, so I went to study design. I did product design, and then I studied in my master's service design and design innovation. I did a couple of internships, and then I got an opportunity to work for the European Space Agency at the European Astronaut Centre. It was the time when I didn't even know that Europe has an astronaut center. I don't know if you knew about it. But this actually we have, and it's pretty cool. And this is the place where the European astronauts are training. Not only European astronauts, all the astronauts are passing at some point through this center. So I had an opportunity to participate in the basic astronaut training of Matthias Maurer, who is a German astronaut. I also participated in a co-organization of the direct return of Tim Peake, who is a British astronaut. And I also had an opportunity, which was my own project, to redesign an interface for the astronaut instructors who write instructions for the experiments that are being performed on ISS. You can see a little bit here kind of instructions, how does it look? It's a pretty complicated procedure. So there's a course that is preparing the instructors to write this kind of procedures and make it, so my task was to make it a little bit more digestible for them, let's say, using design skills. I also did some graphical work from them, like brand identity and some merchandising, like a pin that was for some time an official pin of the European Astronaut Centre as well. But obviously, the most fun was the fact that you can be there meeting astronauts, using the same facilities, using the same gym as the astronauts are using. This is an example for the machine that is simulating the moonwalk, let's say. So this is basically, you are lying horizontally and it's just pulling you with a force that is 1/6 of the Earth's gravity, so it's simulating gravity on the moon. And that's my question for you, like, who of you actually ever dreamed about being an astronaut here? Yeah, me too. Yeah, so you know, I was since when I was a child, I was dreaming about being an astronaut. Actually, until I worked with astronauts, because now I realize that it's such a difficult process. There's a lot of requirements before becoming an astronaut. It's preferable to have an engineering background or a scientific background, to be a pilot or a medical doctor, or preferably all of them at once, and yes, such people exist. Also, you need to have excellent physical condition, ability to live in confined spaces with other people, which is quite important, excellent teamwork, self-control, and ability to adapt quickly. So imagine you have 8,500 people almost who meet the disqualifications, because the last astronaut intake was in May 2009 for the European astronauts. And then you select 6 people out of this number. So this is pretty strict selection. Later, Matthias Maurer was added to this cohort of the astronauts later on. So why am I talking about this? Because I want to realize that these people are selected because of their technical background and knowledge. Because the reality of being in outer space is this. It's everything but not intuitive. It's basically full of cables, full of technical experiments and procedures. So these people are really specifically trained to perform experiments on board of ISS in extreme conditions. But still, when we think about human spaceflight and space in general, we have more this image in mind. Apollo 11 landing on the moon. This year we are lucky to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Apollo moon landing. And yeah, this is basically what we see when we have this image in mind. So why are we exploring space actually? Do you know? Do you have an idea? So NASA administrator, at some point, he divided these reasons in 2 categories. Acceptable reasons, which are basically those that we hear on the news probably, right? For the economical reasons, political reasons, there's a lot of politics involved in human spaceflight above all. Space spin-offs, startups, national security, for science purposes, we go and explore Mars, we go to explore Venus. But the real reasons behind this are those reasons that are making humanity explore since long, long time, right? This is what made us go to explore other continents. Curiosity, challenge, adventure, exploration and discovery, the need for inspiration, the search for inspiration. These are the drivers that are driving the humanity since ever. And now, basically, one of the philosophical points of view on that topic is that it's another step in the evolution of human species, that we go to explore the outer space because of these reasons. So, good. Knowing that and having that in mind, I would like to present you a little bit the state of the space industry right now. So we were talking about the human spaceflight before, but actually human spaceflight is a tiny bit of all the space industry, right? Here you can see that government space budget together with human spaceflight are basically only 1/4 of all the budget and all the money that is in the space sector. All the rest is connected with satellites, satellite technology. And satellites are basically, they can be for telecommunication, for Earth observation, for science, for security. They're for GPS. Everyone has a phone and a GPS in there. This is also a satellite technology, and it's all consumer technology as well. But a lot of people are not aware of this. And myself, I was not really aware of what's going on in the industry until this summer, let's say. Okay, this is a visualization of the satellites, that right now we have 5,000 satellites orbiting above our heads, just to let you know. So I was not aware how huge is this thing until this summer when I went for the International Space University Space Studies program. This is a very intense program, 2 months in summer, where you are with international people, very interdisciplinary, very intercultural as well. And you learn basics of space, basically. You have 127 participants from 37 different countries with over 200 experts. So the ratio is just crazy. One of the lecturers was, do you recognize this person here? Who is that? The one in the middle. Yeah? Buzz Aldrin, yeah, you've seen that before in the presentation. So that's the guy who also went with Neil Armstrong to the moon. So he was one of the lecturers. So this is pretty cool. So you can see the ratio of experts to participants is just insane. And then the program is divided into 3 parts. So you have core lectures, departmental activities, which are basically about different topics, not only engineering or science, as people could think, but we had also humanities when we discussed ethics of exploring space. We had business. We were exploring new commercial business models in space. We had space law, which is fascinating. Like, it's just being created like, for all the cases. And then the last part is a team project. So you choose one of the 4 projects, and you basically send the most intense part of the program. And I would like to focus now on this part, because the project I did was quite interesting for many reasons. The topic was space for urban planning. And our objective was to investigate the impact of space technology and applications on urban planning to achieve a more sustainable future for global society. And the driver behind this was because we experience such a big pressure on cities right now. There will be even growing number of population living in urban areas in the future. So the pressure on the resources in the cities is pretty high. And we were thinking, how can we use space technologies to alleviate some of this pressure and plan better the cities in the future? So our idea was to create a vision for the future city that is using space technologies to manage their resources better. And we didn't only focus on satellites, as we could think, for example, in that case, like Earth observation or urban planning, but we also were thinking about all the technologies that are derived from space, like, for example, energy production, energy transmission, or water recycling, because habitats in space, they need to be so-called closed loops. They need to be everything in a closed loop, everything is recycled. So we use all these concepts and applied them for cities here on Earth and try to evaluate their feasibility and their impact on cities here on Earth. As you can see, it's quite a complex problem to tackle in 3 weeks. So what did we do? We had this group of 30 people. Most of them were engineers. Some of them were, there was a pilot, and a doctor, and a lawyer, and scientist as well. So it was also quite a diverse background. And, well, as a designer, I said, you have a complex problem. Let's do some design process here, right? So that's how I became one of the coordinators of the project, because from my design experience, I could provide a process that could help tackle that complex problem in a relatively short time. And as you can see, this is a very basic design process. But the fun thing about it is that we did this future vision workshop, which was very interesting both for me and for the participants, I believe, because many of them did something like this for the very first time in their lives. So for me, it was interesting to experience that again, because here at the bank, when we do these kind of things, people already know the design methodology and terminology. But if you work with people who do it for the first time, it's like, oh, post-it, what do I do with it? I have to draw. Oh, okay. So this was very interesting for everyone over there. And at the beginning, it could be generating a little bit of frustrations maybe, but later, really, it worked out. And we had worked towards one vision that everyone was aligned. And that was the purpose. So yeah, this diverse team of people, amazing, all of them experts in their field, coming together and working on this complex problem, was an amazing experience. But it also made me realize that apart from the different processes, the way we work, there is also some differences in the way we speak about certain things and certain concepts that I was taking for granted. And I'd like to present you with a couple of examples of those. First of all, user. That was one of the first ones I realized, oh, I think we have something else in common, in mind. what we understand by user in design. By the way, how many of you are designers? Okay, good. So, as designers, we understand user as probably mostly as our end user, so the actual person that is doing something with our product or service at the end. But what I found that in space industry, what they meant by user more governments, agencies, universities, maybe other companies. It had a more institutional concept behind it. And they didn't really consider the final user who is going to use their data or their product at the end, because they never really worked directly with that person. So they really stopped at that point, which I found really interesting in a way. Yeah, that's true. Another topic is sustainability. Luckily, here on Earth, we are every time more aware of the sustainability issues. We are thinking about the life cycle of the products, especially when we are designing them. We are thinking about end-to-end processes as well. In space, it's just starting, let's say it in this way. It's a little bit different because this is so expensive to send things into space that reusing them, repairing them, or bringing them back to Earth, it's even more expensive. So what they used to do, and what they still do, is basically when the satellite runs out of fuel or the things stop working, they just deorbit the thing, so it burns into the atmosphere, or goes into the graveyard orbit, which is basically a trash can flying around. So this is luckily changing because they started to realize that this is becoming a huge problem, the congestion in the orbits. And here in this video that we are going to play in a moment, you can see the historical evolution of the space debris and how it evolved over time. So it's like about 60 years of evolution. So basically, at the beginning, there was not much, and then we started to create and send stuff into space. And the problem of space debris is that it's not a thing that is flying around, but the things are crashing into each other. They create even more space debris. And this space debris flies with the speed of 5 times more than a bullet on Earth. So imagine when when an astronaut could get hit by something like this or other satellite, then we have a problem. So this is becoming a big problem that space agencies all around the world and companies as well are trying to solve, but still there's no one solution, easy solution for this problem. Another one, which is one of my favorites, is the concept of failure. We all know, lean startup, fail fast, fail often, fail early. We like to prototype, we like to iterate. Failure is good, generally speaking, for designers and for startups. In space, when something doesn't work, we have a problem. Do you know the film Apollo 13? Do you know Apollo 13 mission, right? Apart from the lucky number, this was the third mission after Apollo 11 that was supposed to land on the moon. But what happened, like on the way to the moon, they got a failure of the oxygen tank. So instead of mission to the moon, it became a survival mission, basically, to get the crew safely to Earth. Now I'd like to show you a short video from that movie. Oops. Okay, yeah. So this is the flight director, right? Just after he found out about the failure. Okay.
I want this mark all the way back to Earth with time to spare. We never lost an American in space. We're sure as hell not going to lose one on my watch. Failure is not an option.
Yeah, failure is not an option. This said for sure or not, we are not sure if he actually said these kind of words, but this phrase became a slogan for many space engineers. They have t-shirts with that, the posters, you can buy postcards, everything. And kind of makes sense because, right, if you send something into space, you want to make sure it will not fail. And if it fails, you want to make sure you are ready for this. And you want to make sure you do everything to prevent it from failure, which is another logic from fail fast, fail early. I think we can learn from both strategies here. But yeah, for certain, they do a lot of simulation, and the logic is let's prepare for the worst so we can avoid it, or in the worst case scenario, we can be ready for it, right? Okay. So luckily, these things are changing. Right now, the space industry is in a quite of an inflection point in that sense. I don't know if you know this cover of Times from the space race era, but I think it's a pretty neat illustration of what is happening and the point we are at now. So before we had kind of Soviet Union with America racing for the moon, and now this is actually from this year, the cover from Times. It's getting a little bit more crowded, as you can see. You have, okay, China, then you have the SpaceX and Blue Origin, and America just trying to reach the moon at the same time, okay? And you probably know this kind of images. So this is where it's becoming interesting, with the commercial activity entering the game. SpaceX with Falcon 9 is actually doing it, you know? The concept of the sustainability that we were talking about before, just throwing things that burn into the atmosphere. Elon Musk said, okay, why don't we just bring back our rockets? And there he go, he did that. He also did a lot of marketing in space. Like, who else would do that rather than a private company, right? This is another example from Elon Musk. It's called Starlink. I don't know if you heard about it. It's a mega constellation of satellites that is going to bring internet in a global coverage, high-speed internet on a global coverage. And the plan is to launch around 40,000 of these satellites around the world. And this is just an example of 60 of them being launched and seen from Netherlands. Sonia, you can play. So now imagine the congestion that it will also, thank you, cause after the satellites. There are actually a lot of concerns about the astronomical observations, because once they are launched into space, you'll be able to see a lot of little points around, even more than now. And what is really striking in that and the evolution, why it was possible, is, I think it's pretty much illustrated in that photo. This is one of the meteorological satellites, which is of a size of a bus and takes 15 years to develop with the collaboration of many countries. It's a European initiative. And on the left-hand side, you have a CubeSat, which is a much smaller satellite as well. It's the same satellite. It's less complex, of course, cheaper, and faster to produce. And this is actually the evolutions of this pretty much illustrates the evolution of what is happening right now. Because on one hand, we have a space agency developed complex project, and on the other hand, commercial, fast projects that are really changing the industry. Oh, maybe I should put it down. Oh, no. Yes, on. Doesn't work. And of course, we know the commercial space flight with Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic. But to design this kind of things, we need to think about other experiences as well. So privately owned company, Axiom Space, collaborated with designer to rethink the space, because as we've seen before, it's a pretty complex environment. And if you want to invite space tourists, it has to be a little bit more luxurious. So this is one of the examples of how can you rethink the space environment. Another very interesting example is manufacturing in space. Do you know the company Made in Space? They experiment 3D printing in space. And this is one of the things that you could do, but also there is much more of the production in microgravity. In microgravity, what happens is that when you produce stuff, it changes its structure. So for example, it also works for medicine or biological tissues. So because of the lack of gravity, the structure of the things is different, and also their properties. This also happens, for example, with fiber optics. And fiber optics produced in space has better properties than the one produced on Earth. So just think about all the possibilities that inward manufacturing can have in the future. And all of this is called New Space. New Space is basically all the commercial initiatives that are happening right now in the space industry. This is an example of a Starship from SpaceX. I don't know if you saw, it's also from this year. They are planning to go to the moon and to Mars. This Starship is basically the vehicle that is planned to go into deep space as well. So all of these new space initiatives are creating potential for new business models. And these new business models will bring new processes. And these new processes will create new experiences that will finally reach new users. And this is very fascinating because, in a way, space industry, it's not really, not ready, but they don't really know how to do it because they've never done it before. As we see the concept of the user, they don't really have it in mind. And as much I admire like everything, and I love space industry, but yeah, they might need a little bit of support. And this year I also went to the International Aeronautical Congress in Washington. And in the conversations, in the presentations, in the talks, there were a lot of topics about diversity, collaboration, what is the future of the space industry, what is the future of the humanity. We should involve more of the citizens in this discussion, we should engage, we should do outreach, we should co-create. It all sounds very familiar, right? Strangely familiar. So I was thinking, how can actually design help with this transition that the space industry is going right now? And of course, this is kind of, my mapping, but I think it's a pretty constant process for all the industries, because of course we have the graphic design, we have space communication, pieces that are more like communication pieces, graphical pieces, from my experience as well, astronaut training. Then we have a bunch about human factors, making things more intuitive in terms of interfaces, in terms of product design, in terms of ergonomy, interior design, architecture. This is already happening. There are people specialized in these things working. And then what is happening right now, we start to see new business models, innovation processes, and startups that are requiring a bit more of systems thinking and stakeholder alignment and co-creation processes that right now are, they are struggling with these innovation processes. And also, of course, cross-industry innovation and future forecast and things that we don't even imagine right now that can be possible in the future. And if you think about this process, it's basically the evolution of design discipline in any other industry that we have, from more, let's say, tactical to more strategic. And this is what happened, for example, with fintech that we know here, that a couple of years ago, we are going through the same process, but we are already in the process. And you can see proof of that, for example, here in this space. That's why we are here. BBVA is one of the examples. But my message here is that the space industry is basically at the beginning of that process. So this is very interesting to observe as well. So my question is, what future do we want? And who is going to be involved in that future? Because of course, we have plans to have cities on Mars. This is by Elon Musk as well, by the way. And this might seem a little bit far-fetched, but they are actually plans, strategic plans that are funded and they are placed to build moon base and bring back humans to the moon. And this is Project Artemis. Anyone heard about Artemis before? It is basically called Apollo of our generation. So this is a program that is already strategic program. It's already people working on it with technology being developed that aims to put the first women and more men on the moon within the next decade and stay there, like build a sustainable and constant human presence on the moon and use it as a playground for exploring even further to the Mars. And these are strategic plans of NASA in collaboration with other national space agencies. So this is happening. But we have to ask ourselves, who is going to shape that future? And how it will influence our life here on Earth? And how do we actually make humans to strive and not only survive in space, especially if you want them to stay there, like to go there for longer periods of time? And I think design can be involved, and also all the humanity should be involved in discussions on these topics, because it's such an important topic for exploration of space and to exploration of our species as well. And I think design with its human-centered approach and holistic mindset can help answer a lot of these questions. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Aleksandra. Si tenéis alguna pregunta, podéis realizarla en español si queréis. Aleksandra habla español perfecto. ¿Dudas, preguntas, comentarios? Bueno, perfecto.
Es como una polaca.
Habla español súper bien.
There are freebies for good questions.
Tiene regalos para las preguntas.
I'm not sure what you just said in Spanish, but I can only ask this in English, if that's all right. At the very beginning of the presentation, you showed us the procedure that you redesigned for the astronauts.
For the instructors of the astronauts.
The instructors. What was your biggest surprise when you saw what they had to do and then changing it?
What they had to do. I mean, my biggest surprise was, first of all, I mean, I was not surprised that the procedure itself is very complicated, but what was complicated is that they had a course for the instructors to write this procedure, and the course itself was so complicated that you almost needed another course to understand what is going on. And so my task was really to make it more visual, more intuitive, and we basically I did some process design over there, we did some video tutorials, we did some graphics, we just made it a little bit nicer. And this was already a lot, and it was they already were like, wow, this is amazing. And for me, that was the biggest surprise and a signal over there, like, okay, there's a lot of space for improvement here, you know. But the problem with space and procedures in space and everything really with space technology when it's at the current state of art is that, I mean, the philosophy behind it is basically, if it works, why should we change it? And it's the same with, for example, Soyuz. Soyuz is the same technology that we are using since, 70s, basically. And it's still the only vehicle able to take people out to space. I mean, maybe Elon Musk will come up with something now, the Dragon. But yeah, for nowadays, it's the only one. And so, yeah, I guess this is my surprise, like, yeah, we can. Give us a sticker.
More questions now that you know that.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias por la presentación. Ha sido muy, muy interesante. Y bueno, hablabas un poco de cómo has llevado diseño al espacio y me gustaría saber si te has traído algo a diseño, o sea, algo que hayas aprendido del espacio, del curso, de todo el tiempo que llevas de recorrido aprendiendo sobre el espacio, si hay algo que puedas incorporar a diseño.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, there are a lot of things. First of all, yeah, we were talking about this concept of failure, of users, so I realized, okay, this is not so obvious. For some people it might be obvious, but actually we are talking about a couple of different things here, and I think it's important to highlight that, because this is where are you putting your focus and what is your strategy towards, for example, users or failure, or this is how you are, the way you are working. Another, and doesn't mean that any of them is better, they are both valid, it just depends on the context, right? Another learning that I had is this project basically, and this workshop in particular, because as I said, there were a lot of people who did it for the first time, and for me it was also in a while the first time when I had people doing it for the first time, so I was really careful how I explain things and what is the process and what am I saying and what are expectations, because for me it was very interesting to see that they see value of the process, that you have so much interiorized, and yeah, so it's kind of makes that, wow, this is really working actually.
More questions?
Sticker. Well, you can choose actually. You can choose what you want.
Thank you. Touching on the failure aspect that I've mentioned before, because I think that both phrases, they are the same, different sides of the same coin maybe. And of course you cannot fail in space, but to get to this point where failure is not an option, you have to fail a lot of times. So I was wondering how are the processes built? Like do they, I believe they do prototype a lot, and do they have service designers working on that, or
Service
how do they go about it?
designers, They don't have. Actually, I just cut a little bit this part of the presentation, but initially I had more concepts, and design was one of them. Design, basically, it's just engineering design, so like CAD models and systems design and stuff like this. So yeah, they have a lot of engineers and designers working on this. They have like a special chambers where, for example, they put satellites inside and create kind of a space-like environment. But still, it's kind of a safe environment because you have this chamber over there here on Earth. And yeah, they do a lot of simulations. For example, for space flight, they do a lot of simulations like everything goes wrong, you know, type of a flight simulation exercises as well. But it's all simulations. You never really know how it's going to behave eventually. I mean, you kind of simulate as accurate as you can, but you know, if something hits your spacecraft, then you have a problem and you have to combine and maneuver, and this is really becoming a problem, space debris as well. So there are a lot of simulations on Earth, yes, but it cannot be really tested in the real environment until it's really in the outer space. Makes sense, right?
And are they testing also these problems that can occur?
Are they clustering?
Testing.
Testing. Yeah, that's what I say. They have like a chambers and they have procedures to test that. Like how do you behave as a flight control, for example, when you lose contact with your spacecraft, for example. Yeah, they are testing the procedures on Earth for sure, yes.
Thank you. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, I just want to build on that question a bit more because sometimes things happen in space that will never happen on Earth. And like such as when they discovered space welding exists. To what extent should you or can you design for failure? Because things will happen. Does that allow for a margin of failure if you're designing for it? Or does it like, is kind of like wearing a seatbelt in a car, does that make you more or less prone to accidents?
I mean, yes, of course, you have you try to predict what's going to be the failure, what's going to be the problem, and it could be like really anything. Like for example of that is Apollo missions actually. At that time, they didn't know about the solar activity, but right now we know that if the actually sun was active at that time, they probably would have been killed. But they didn't know that there's this danger, you know? We just know it right now. So there are a lot of things that we still don't know about space, and this is the fascinating part of it. There's a constant exploration and constant trying to predict what's going on. And every time, of course, we are better at it, and there are like better radiation shieldings and better propulsion technologies, but still it's a lot of improvement to go.
So going back to the topic you talk about business plans and startups, what have been the most crazy or interesting idea you have heard about to develop a business plan in Spain, in space? Sorry.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I can say the craziest plan. I mean, there are people who actually there are companies who. Their business plan is just basically go to the moon, you know. I want to go to the moon and I want to do advertising on the moon. But how can I mean, my doubt is like how effective can be that for a longer period of time, you know? Or there's a lot of space for crazy ideas. But what you have to understand is that, for example, launching industry is also becoming some kind of a vehicle because now they are being commercialized, so what you are buying a space on the launching vehicle that takes your experiment or whatever into space. It's like a business, you know? Okay, I'm like a bus driver, I'm taking your thing to space, and then I don't really care what's your experiment, and then I just take care of the transport, right? And there are a lot of new business models like this kind, and as I was saying before as well about microgravity, we are going to see more of that because right now you can test basically anything in microgravity and it's a valid test. Oh, let's see how do you grow a plant in microgravity, and it's already a valid test because we don't know really all the consequences of microgravity and how things behave over there, and we know they are different. So we're just trying to figure out what are the possibilities and what can we use for the benefit of the humankind, basically. So all this kind of experiments, are pretty interesting to follow.
can any private company do whatever they want in Spain if you have the money, or is there any legislation to?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Space law. Okay, space law. This is an interesting topic. Yeah, right now basically what is happening. Maybe with cases will be. I mean, they cannot do everything they want. No, that's for sure. There are a couple of rules which were stated in some outer space treaties. There's one outer space treaty from 76, from 1976, which was signed by most of the countries in the world. And it basically says, for example, that all the space is the commonwealth of humanity. So if whatever you bring from space, it's not yours, it's all the humanity. It belongs to all the humanity. So this is a problem right now. I mean, it's a beautiful idea, but for example, in the terms of space mining right now, this is a problem because how do we, monetize or build a business out of this? So there's a lot of discussion about that right now happening in the space industry. And yes, so definitely companies right now, they cannot do what they want. Normally what happens is that the government is actually responsible for your activity in space because it was the domain of the governments, of the space agencies before, which were government run. And yeah, so at the moment, it's like that. And what's going to be in the future, we don't know yet. But for example, there are a couple of rules also from the space treaties that you cannot take life to other celestial bodies. That's one of the rules. That is kind of. There are a couple of things like this, so just preventing spreading life involuntarily. Where are the freebies you can distribute, actually?
So, what do you think is the most meaningful contribution of the strategic design to the space industry?
The most meaningful one, I mean, I don't know if there's one, but yeah, definitely we can contribute a lot with our knowledge about innovation processes and basically processes and all sorts of market analysis and trying to figure out what are the needs and how can space technologies contribute to the life on Earth as well. There's a lot of space for improvement of that as well, like outreach, trying to communicate in a more humane language all these technologies and all these benefits, because that's actually a big part of what space agencies are trying to do as well, and they are struggling with that maybe sometimes. And yeah, strategic design, I think as such it doesn't yet exist in the space industry, but again, I think it's just a matter of time and innovation and these processes that are in place. And it's like any other industry if you think about it. It was going through the same transformation pattern, and as I said, just space industry just starting. But if you think any other industry was going through the same similar process. The difference here is now that I see is the concept of the user. They really understand it a little bit differently, right? They don't really have, until let's say some of the companies now, they really didn't have in mind the final user, which probably makes the need for design a little bit less, I would say, and need for things being more, let's say, user-friendly, because they deal with specialists. They just people like them, all around.
Going back to the future city that you were talking about, is this something that it's being implemented in this moment, like taking knowledge from space processes and design systems and bringing it, I don't know, maybe in organizations here on Earth, or is someone doing it?
Okay, so this project was basically more like a benchmark of technologies and potential technologies that could be used on Earth. But during the research, we obviously found that, and this was also connected with the Sustainable Development Goals. So we were trying to answer the Sustainable Development Goals from that as well. And but we found out, for example, you already use a lot of satellites, for example, for the disaster management and Earth observation. So there are a lot of technologies that are already used in place, but we were just thinking, how can you make them used in a more, let's say, connected way for the purpose of actually planning the cities and mitigate some of the pressures and problems that you have arising from this growing pressure on urban areas. But yeah, definitely some concepts that are already used in place, all this like GPS mapping, or there was a crazy idea, for example, of energy transmission by microwaves. This is actually apparently already being tested as well. So there are some kind of concepts that were more futuristic, some of them that were already kind of being considered by some governments, or they were considered to be used on Earth. And yeah, as a part of this project, which I didn't have here, we also developed a set of guidelines for local governments to help them kind of prepare and make sure if they want to use this kind of technologies, they are prepared and they inform their citizens how it's going to work and what are the benefits. So it was kind of a set of guidelines for the local governments to help them introduce this kind of technologies in a more transparent and efficient way.
And then, like in the other side of the coin, is there any spaces or programs right now that are working on that, bringing the citizens more towards the space design, taking into account that they are the real user?
About citizen involvement, now we were talking about here. So yeah, there's a lot of discourse about that. You're talking about involving the citizens more in the space. Yeah, I mean, there are outreach programs again. There are a lot of discussions, but I think we need more of that. Like the proof of this, for example, we don't know about the plans going to the moon, and we don't really know all the implementations of the technologies that are being taken in place, and I think it's really interesting. So, but it's also a huge topic as well. It's a little bit both sides. So now they can inform us, but we also need to create some kind of a need for that information as well. So yeah, definitely there's a big potential to grow in that area as well, and they are really looking into this, and any ideas are welcome.
Last question? Oh, okay.
Yeah, hi. I think that us as designers, at some point, we have to sell the idea of design to people out of this field, the importance of design. So my question is how you manage to sell to these people, scientists, engineers, the importance of design, that design was the way to go to achieve what, like, user experience, I don't know,
yeah.
every concept we work in every day.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, it was pretty easy because we had 3 weeks to do a project. No one really had a clue what to do with this at the beginning. So I just said, okay, I have an idea. Let's just use, because I'm used to working with complex problems here in the bank. We do a lot of research and we do design process. And with this kind of background, I said, okay, I can help you. I have a process that can work, and we can do it collaboratively with co-creation, and we can try to do it this way. Okay, let's do it. And I was trying to always explain what is the methodology and what are the steps and what's going to be the output, and just by doing, basically. I mean, you can talk about design, you can name the benefits of it as well, but really, when you see it working, this is where you sell it. And that's probably the easiest.
Thank you very much, Aleksandra, for this talk. Thank you very much, Aleksandra, for this talk. Thank you all for coming here. Now we're going to have a small, we'll have some food and we can have some drinks, and you can ask her more questions if you feel like it. Thank you very much for coming, and thanks again, Aleksandra, for this amazing talk. Thank you.
Thank you.